From high above his mountaintop in Oklahoma, Watchman Larry Taylor brings you The Edge Portal, produced by Dorothy Crothers.
The data. The Creator, He's bound by no such rule as time. He's at the beginning, at the end, and in the middle, all the way through, all the time.
You want answers? You want answers!
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
Data?
Son, we live in a world that has walls, and those walls have to be guarded. Who's gonna do it? You!
Very simple.
Stand a post.
No one would have believed in the early years of the 21st century that our world was being watched by intelligence greater than our own. They observe.
Data trails.
But as men busy themselves about their various concerns, they observe.
The Creator.
The Bible says there comes to be a time when time is no more. I think it was
A human given directions by the Holy Spirit. It's great stuff. Very simple. Very simple. Very simple.
Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Edge Portal. Larry is going to be having Richard Shaw on tonight and Augusto Perez. Welcome to the broadcast, Larry.
Thank you so much, Dorothy, and thank you working the production end of this thing and getting it, putting all the wheels on. Do we have Richard and Augusto with us?
I'm here.
Okay, I will call Richard while you guys chatter. How's that?
That'll be fine. Augusto, glad to have you. Just pull yourself a chair up there behind the other side of that electronic table, and I'll get this thing started off. How's things in Florida?
Oh, things are going well, Larry. Thank you for having me. The weather is starting to warm up here, and we're just getting into the swing of things, I guess you could say.
Oh man, I'm glad to hear it. I heard y'all had some nasty weather up your way, and we have here. Listen, by the way, Augusto, I forwarded you a while ago, and see if you can find it, the latest table, the latest matrix, and very, very interesting information. You should be able to, it should come right straight to you.
Yeah, I got it here.
Okay, we'll bring that up during the show, and we might kind of corner Richard into trying to get an explanation of what all those words mean.
Yeah, it's next year.
Well, interestingly, it falls in the time frame that things do happen or seem to really happen, and and it goes along with what you've been sharing so many times about the feast and the actually the Hebrew calendar. I mean, a lot of this stuff just clicked right in, and of course we know that we've got the Gregorian calendar, and it's a little bit different, and so all of this seems to fall and be clicking into where it should. Well, I think we're in the time frame that's a very serious time.
Yeah, I totally agree. I got an email just this afternoon from another intercessory group, and informing me that tomorrow there's going to be a vote in the Senate. I haven't even had a chance to check it on the trade, on the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. They're supposed to, fast track this thing tomorrow and sign this agreement, which basically is going to give President Obama, all kinds of powers to sign deals, and approve deals that we don't even know what they're about, and so I just got this in the mail, and if this thing passes, which I don't doubt it wouldn't pass, it would give President Obama powers to write trade treaties on his own without anybody knowing about it. And so this is not good.
Well, Augusto, I almost just have to respond by saying what's new. I mean, we have, the American people have sat back in their lawn chairs, or maybe they're all on their couch, I'm not sure, lots of couches, and watched all of this come to pass. All the warnings didn't mean anything, and I'll bring something up, something Richard said on a private phone call with me the other day, talking about, he mentioned, we were talking about how the church is simply not, as an entity, is not warning the people and preparing them at all in the churches across America. And he mentioned something that really clicked with me. He said, "Oh my," he said, and this is not an exact quote, I'm paraphrasing. He said, how quickly the sand of the church is running through our fingers. We're running out of time, Augusto, and the church itself is just running through our fingers. There's no substance anymore, hardly.
Well, I think the church has lost touch with reality. Is really what I think has happened, and the church is still back, 30 years ago, just preaching their messages, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with preaching messages, but we are in a time that there is an urgency. I don't think they are aware of this, and the urgency to get people saved, to get them to know Jesus Christ, to get them ready, to get them prepared, to get them aware of many of these things that are happening right in front of our noses, and they have no knowledge whatsoever, and the preachers don't seem to be interested in sharing any of these things.
Oh, you're exactly right.
Hey, guys.
Hey, Richard.
This is Richard Shaw.
Glad to have Richard Shaw with us. Augusto's on here with us today. He pulled a chair up to the electronic table, and we're all sitting here. And let me, Richard.
Hey, Richard, how you doing?
Good. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good down here in Florida.
I was just listening to both of you talking. I didn't want to interrupt.
Well, I'll tell you what, for the folks, I can't imagine anybody out there don't know you, Richard. I've had you a few times as a guest, and I have to say, I really have to say this, that if I rated you as a guest from 1 to 10, I would say you're 11. I mean, that's not a bad number, and that's not a bad number in my eyes. Now, some people don't like 11, but maybe you're a 12. That's a good number for the kingdom.
I paid Larry to say that.
Well, the check's not in the mail yet. but I'll tell you what, I'm glad to have you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Larry.
I'll tell you what, folks. We'll get started here in just a second because Richard's got a lot of stuff on his plate. But it's very difficult. I know a lot of other people bring Richard on, Richard Shaw, who we're talking about with Penlight.com. And they bring him on and introduced him. But, as I've talked to him over the years and had him on some shows and we've discussed things, and I've watched his production of not only Watcher series, but also, now the WORDZ Project, and we'll get into that shortly, and Tora Codes Into Darkness, and I could go on and on. Richard has been very busy for quite a few years, and some of it seems like almost behind the scenes. But now, I find myself caught to actually, Richard, introduce you because your resources and your sources of data are so varied and actually leap past the scope of a lot of research out there, anywhere. And, man, I don't know. Richard Shaw, where do you want to go? You want to start with the WORDZ Project? Because I know a lot of people will not be familiar with that.
Oh, sure. I mean, I've got some new Torah code tables here, and I've got information about the WORDZ Project and can tell you what it is and what happened with it. And, all of those things were... And, I've been working for years on some of these projects, and they're finally coming to fruition. It's been 7 years on some of them. Isn't that amazing? But and I'm working with LA on Watchers 9 on top of everything else. Like, help.
Lord help us. Oh, I'll tell you, you're the most busy person I've ever seen, but yet you seem to have the time to pick up my phone calls, and I really appreciate that. But let me mention something and let you explain it. Go ahead.
Well, I just said this is important, doing these interviews, because it allows people the opportunity to ask questions. And then that's helpful to me also, because I can find out what people are interested in and what they want to know about, and then it helps me with my research to be able to figure out the answers to those questions if there's any way to answer them.
That is true. Dorothy, if you would, write into the chat room that if anybody's got any really good questions that they want to send to Richard, in the second hour we'll have some questions, and maybe somebody wants to ask Augusto something about what we're talking about. If you would, Dorothy, and just they can either come in the second hour. You can bring them in one at a time, or you can just read them, and we'll try to answer them. But Richard, let me tell you, I was shocked. I mean, I was literally shocked. Now, I don't think Augusto's seen your, and what we're talking about is the WORDZ Project, and that's WORDZ with a Z for zebra,
right.
I guess. This is so unique, and you blowed me away, literally, when you told me that, you were talking about the WORDZ Project, and if people don't know and haven't been watching, I've been blogging all week about it, and I even put that the words literally are the red words of Jesus of Nazareth.
Right.
That were being used on these songs. And when you said Muslims also were involved, I didn't have words to express myself. Tell us about this. Tell us about it.
I know.
This is really neat.
No, it's really fascinating. I mean, my friend Lee Callan did this book. It took him years to put it together. And you'd think, well, that's easy. You just take the red letter edition out of the Bible and you put them in some kind of order and bind it and put it into a book so people could read it. Well, he went into great lengths to make sure everything was accurate, and he kind of did his own translation of it to make sure that it would read like a book. Like, I thought it was really fascinating what he did, because there's a lot of intervening text in the New Testament where Jesus is saying something, and then there's all of this other comment, and then there's something else happens, and then we don't hear from Jesus actually saying anything for another chapter or two, and then something else comes back in. But this book is like nothing but just Jesus's words. So in that respect, it's kind of cool, because if you've never read what Jesus actually has said in the New Testament, you don't want to take the time to read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you may not really realize some of the things he said. And this makes it like he's just sitting there talking to you. So I thought it was a brilliant book. Well, at the time, this goes back a long ways. I was working on another movie. I was co-producing a film called Beat the Drum, which was about a little African kid in KwaZulu-Natal that who his whole family dies of AIDS except for his grandmother, and no one knew why they were dying. And he hitchhikes his way into Johannesburg and find out what's going on. And it took a couple years of work to do that motion picture, because it was actually on 35 millimeter, and it went all over the world. And so my company, Pinlight, was involved in doing what they call in the movie industry creating the deliverables. So that meant I had to spend hours basically in the studio color timing the film with my friend David Block, who was running the Da Vinci. And it's a really expensive process. Just to color time the film and do all of the formats and the 7 different audio tracks that it had to have and all that was over $100,000 just for that aspect. We haven't had a budget like that to work with since then. I mean, that was like, a lot of money, and that doesn't even include shooting the film or editing it or anything. So it just, once you start working with film, it just gets really pricey. So anyway, while I'm doing that, Lee's working on this book, and a man came to a private screening of Beat the Drum, and it was this old Indian man was sitting in the back, and he came up and talked to me, and it was, guess who that was? It was Red Crow Westerman. Have you guys heard of him?
Yeah, I have.
I haven't. No.
Red Crow was in many X-Files episodes as the old wise Indian that could speak the language and could decode messages that came into Scully and Mulder. Well, this guy shows up at our screening and talked with me for a long time afterwards, saying that what was going on in Africa is not all that dissimilar to what was happening in Indian tribes here in America. And I found him to be a very pleasant, kind, full of wisdom old guy, and I instinctively really liked him the first time we met. Well, somehow Lee also was able to get a hold of him, and Red Crow read a large portion of the book for us and recorded it. So we have Red Crow Westermen reading the words. So we had this idea, well, maybe we get all these guys to read it for us, famous people or unlikely people, not just church pastors, but people that were interesting. Well, one day I had met this guy named Warren Holden, and he came into my studio and said, I know this guy named Big Slice, and Big Slice, I said, who's that? He said, he builds cars for Snoop Dogg. I said, really? And he said he wants to do a car show, and he would like to talk to you about directing it for him. I said, okay, we'll have him come over. And I had no idea, what this was going to be like. Well, so the day comes, and this really big dude steps into my studio, 6'4", big as a refrigerator, big smile on his face. And it was that moment I fell in love with this guy. Big Slice was just one of the sweetest, nicest guys I'd ever met. And I told Lee about him, and I said, this guy would rather spend all afternoon talking to kids how to build cars to keep them from going to jail than he would almost anything else. So, I mean, this is for kids in Watts and the black community, kids that are selling weed and doing things to try to make money, and this is like an escape for them to work on cars. I think it's a real healthy thing. So anyway, Lee goes, you think Slice would read the words for us? Because we'd just done this other thing with Red Crow. So I said, well, it's very possible. I mean, he was a really nice guy and likes to help people. Maybe he would read it. And that would really be wild, having the guy that builds Snoop's cars reading the words of Jesus in the studio. I mean, those are the kind of connections I love to make, because that's just the unexpected thing, and it pulls people in from the fringes that you normally wouldn't ask to do something like that. And, so Warren got a hold of Slice, but meanwhile, when I asked Warren that, because he was my contact for Slice, he goes, well, I used to manage the Bone Thugs and Harmony, and being white and really stupid at the time, I didn't know who the Bone Thugs were. And I realized that they'd sold like 30 million albums. They were America's favorite hip-hop band, and insanely talented. I mean, just like ridiculously good. And I said, he said, Bone Thugs and Harmony would probably want to do a song for you using the words of Jesus. And I said, you're joking, right? And he goes, no. He said, they're doing a concert in Reno, and we could go up there, and they said that they'll let you record them doing the concert. And I said, okay. So we rented an SUV, and we drove like 14 hours to Reno with all of our equipment. And they do the concert. Lee and I are up on stage with the Bone Thugs with their cameras. It was so bizarre. It was hilarious fun, actually. They opened the concert, and guess who was the next guy to come up after them?
Oh, no.
And if you don't know rappers, I mean, I don't know if you know who this is, but it was DMX.
Well, I do
DMX
after watching the WORDZ Project. And let me tell people that don't realize this, when it starts out, you've got a 6'4" black guy standing there by a car he built that's jumping up and down. And then, if they haven't seen the WORDZ Project, this is the filmography is just incredible. I mean, absolutely credible, and wow.
Oh, well,
all I
thank
can say
you, Larry.
is wow.
Well, so anyway, I have to tell you this part of the story because it always cracks me up. I was so blown away with what happened that evening. So we shot the concert, and it's Lazy's birthday. Lazy is the guy who was one of the main soloists for Bone Thugs. Really nice kid. This led into other things, but we're sitting out in the hallway. I'm with Dragos, who's the guy that writes a lot of the beats for Bone Thugs, and was involved in their Emmy-winning piece. They won a Grammy for The Crossroads, which was a hugely popular tune. I didn't know what The Crossroads was about because I was stupid. You know, I'm going, oh, okay, great, the Crossroads. Well, when I looked up the video that played on MTV, it was up on YouTube for the Crossroads, it was about people dying and going to heaven. That's what the whole rap was about.
Wow.
And they dedicated it to Eazy-E, who died of AIDS, and who gave them their first shot. And it's
that's incredible.
The most touching thing I'd about ever seen. I'm going, wow, this is really powerful. So, I mean, while in one hand they got their start on Death Row Records and were doing gangster rap, but in their heart of hearts, they were more interested in doing stuff like that.
Oh man, that's heavy.
Yeah. So we go in, and Lazy finally shows up. It's like at this point, it's like after 1 a.m, we're sitting in the hallway in front of the door to Lazy's hotel room. He opens the door, and we all pile in. Oh, I don't know. There must have been 20 of us. Because he has kind of an entourage, all these guys that travel with him, and the girls, you know, they had a cake. They had, you know, his mom called. I mean, it was just like, and I don't even know who these people are yet. You know, it's like, and Lee at the time was sitting here, he goes, this is not going to happen, is it? And I said, I would just be patient. I think something's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen yet. So, I mean, most of you know that music is done differently than it's ever been done before. You walk in with a little tiny keyboard and a laptop computer, and that's your orchestra. I mean, that's the way it works now. So Dre walks in with his little keyboard and his digital recording system, and Lazy gets there, and we hand him the book, and he opens it up. He goes, I want to read about the blessings, he said. I said, okay, cool. I said, can I record you talking about it? And he goes, yeah. And Lazy, this is when I realized how good he is on camera. And he just, you know how fun it is to work with a real professional and not an amateur? Because they know what you need. You don't have to direct them. You just say, go. And they just do it. Well, that's the way Lazy is, man. He's just like right into the lens. He's got the intensity. All I had to do was follow his moves. And he goes, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And he's reading this stuff. I could hardly hold the camera still. I was just like, I couldn't believe it. And guys are like drinking Coronas around me, and there's guys lighting up weed in the other room. And yet, in this room, it was full of the Holy Spirit. It was just like, what the heck is happening? I couldn't understand it. I'd never been in an environment quite like that before. And then all the guys were going...
I watched this, Richard. I don't mean to interrupt you here, but I just wanted to tell people that I watched the WORDZ Project, and listen, that thing, if you really reflect on what was brought together and who was brought together, and you know what Richard, you talked about the Holy Spirit being there. If the Holy Spirit hadn't been there or hadn't been present at that location when this was done, you wouldn't have had actually the result you came up with. And so it's almost like the Holy Spirit not only orchestrated the event, so to speak, but at the same time it was there directing as it went.
Yeah, I really believe that. And I don't use the words Holy Spirit lightly or it sound churchified, because I don't know how else to explain what happened. And a lot of times when I'm in a secular crowd, it's like, how do I explain this phenomena without going into Christianese, which I just detest? I hate that. People don't even know what they're talking about if haven't been to church or anything like that. And then all of a sudden, you're different than they are, and you can't relate to them. But yet, in this room, you could feel God walking around. I mean, you just could tell that it was happening. It was just breathtaking. You'd get chill bumps on your arms. It was just like, I don't have the words to express it. And what really bugs me about this project was, the worst thing that you can do in a situation like this. Now, when you're at this level of commercial rap talent, at this level, this is the highest level of rapping talent in America. They won the AMA Award in 2007 for America's favorite hip-hop band. And these were the guys that we're working with. And what ended up happening was something that I never expected. We ended up building a relationship where we really loved each other. And as you can tell, like in the end of the film, we're on the Bone Thugs and Harmony's bus. Now, some of the big mucky mucks in Hollywood that knew Lee, because Lee was also working with Ricky Lee Jones, who's a real famous musician. So Lee had some music producer contacts that I didn't. And they had heard that we were doing this with Bone Thugs. They knew how private the Bone Thugs and Harmony, how tightly knit that whole group is. They just don't let people on their bus. That just doesn't happen. And Lazy personally asked Lee and me to be there when they let his brother out of prison. He'd been in prison for almost 10 years. And we said, yeah, we'd be honored to come. Why do you want us to be there? And he goes, because you guys, I feel like you're our protectors. And we never preached. We never did anything but answer questions. People were saying like, well, what does this mean? Or what is Jesus saying here? What's that all about? Or what about the rest of the Bible? Or I mean, any of those. And it was the same with Big Slice. And a lot of them said that this project changed their life. It changed their life because they got involved.
You know, Richard, let me stop you here just for a second. I want to insert something that's really interesting. You know, what you're saying and bringing out, it reminds me so much. Now, there's two authors that are so good at this. One is his name is Davis Bunn. He's an author. And also Joel C. Rosenberg. And both of those are Christian writers, are follow Yeshua. But what they do is so interesting because in some of their books, they actually embed secret things that have happened that are unreported to the whole Western world, to where there are meetings and conversions in the Muslim communities around the world, but it's yet kept so secret, like a little golden nugget, amongst the peoples of the world, that unless you actually saw it in one of their books and found out what was happening, you didn't know it even occurred. Now, this is what's interesting, Richard, is the fact that you were talking about, and I know you'll bring it up, the poets, and for them to be involved. I mean, this is all just so crazy.
Last poets.
It's crazy, but it's really beautiful,
The Last Poets, again, I didn't know who they were. This is a different world I was having to learn about. It actually, part of being a filmmaker, being involved with things you would never, ever do. But when you have a camera and you have to make a story and you're asked to direct something, which that's the case for me most of the time now, then I don't want to be a complete nudnik and not understand what I'm doing. So I have to get to know these people. I have to know their background. And so I had Lazy. Okay, the Bone Thugs and Harmony, for those who don't know, is a rap group. There's several guys in it, and they all have bone names. So there's Lazy Bone, Wishbone, Flesh and Bone, Crazy Bone. All these guys are part of the group, and they all have their own little thing that they do really well. Well, Lazy told me his life story. He wanted me to make a movie about it. But, that takes backing from a studio, and I didn't want to tell him how hard that is to try to get that to happen. But it'd make a great movie. But when he was just a kid in school, I don't know, 12, 13 years old, he was selling dope. You go, oh, he was a bad kid, blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, he wasn't really at all. His mom was renting a house. I believe this was in Cleveland, and she couldn't make the rent payments. So Lazy would go to school with his pockets full of pill bottles, and he made enough money from that to pay the rent. That's how they survived for years. And then one day, one of the drug dealers that was selling this stuff to him turned him into the cops, and there was this huge bunch of police that showed up, and he had all these little dime bags of things in his pockets and everything. When he told me the story, it's hard to keep from cracking up when he told the whole story because it's just so incredible, and it's weirdly funny. It's like watching Lethal Weapon or something, I mean, it's just really funny. So the policeman goes, okay, dump your pockets out. So he's laying all these things, all his drugs out on the hood of the police car. There were like 90 little dime bags of drugs and all these things. So he figured, well, I'm never going to get out of prison for the rest of my life. So they arrest him. He's like I don't know how old he was, 12, 13 years old at that point. He gets arrested, and they send him to a prison in Texas somewhere, if I remember the story right. So he's away from home, and the judge didn't really throw the book at him, but he gave him 2 years, like in juvenile hall. So he gets back home 2 years later. The second day after he gets home, he goes, man, I'm home. It's great. And he's walking down the street, and this drug dealer kid comes up from behind him and shoots him in the head.
Oh.
And the last thing he remembers, he went unconscious. Next thing he knows, he's laying on a bed, and they're ripping off his pants, and he gets really mad. And he said the doctor looked over him and said, how you doing, Ironhead? And he said, what do you mean? And he couldn't hear out of his ear. He said, they shot you in the head, and the bullet's still in there.
Wow.
And he thought he'd never hear out of that one ear again. 6 months later, miraculously, the ear started to work again. Or he had never done what he's doing now. And once I was at a hotel room, Lazy called me and wanted to see me, so I went over to his hotel room in Hollywood and went in there, and he said, sit down, man, I want you to feel this. And he grabbed my hand, and he put it on the side of his head, and I said, what's that? He said, that's the bullet.
Oh.
You can still feel it.
Wow.
So he lives with a bullet in the side of his head. Now, this is a life, the way these kids grew up. Now, Big Slice was dealing drugs when he was a kid. He lived in Watts, and he also was working on cars. He liked doing that. And he was doing major drug deals back then, $1 million. Because when you're in Watts, there's no way out. You live, he said, as he's told me before, you live in a 10-block bubble. And so they were working on this car, trying to get to start. He poured a little gas in the carburetor, and before he was ready, the guy turned on the ignition, and, of course, the carburetor backfired and threw all that gas on Slice's upper body, and it immediately ignited.
Man.
So Slice was burned over like 40% of his body. And he said he remembered being in the hospital and the doctor bringing him a brochure with various earlobes to look at because his had been burnt off.
Wow. So you're actually bringing it together. You're bringing it together, and for people that watch the WORDZ Project, you'll see the folks of an incredibly varied bunch of people that have all kind of background that are really great talent, though, on top of it all.
Hugely talented, and real sweethearts once you get to know them. So Slice told me, he said, I prayed to God when I was in a hospital. He said, Lord, I'll never sell drugs again. I'll do something else. If you just get me out of this situation. And they had his head was all wrapped up and everything. And he told me, he said, when they took the bandages off, his ear looked like nothing had ever happened to it.
Really? Wow.
So he got out of the hospital. He said he had $38, and that's what he used to start his company building lowrider cars. He had this one little thing that he knew how to make that no one else did, a hydraulic component, to make the cars jump. And somehow, Snoop was a good friend of his too, and, fell into fame and fortune and ended up hiring Slice to build cars. And Slice built something like 38 cars for Snoop. Some of them were made into radio-controlled toys that you'd see under the Christmas tree. And he became, internationally renowned for his cars.
I really like the yellow one you've got in the film.
Yeah, that's called the Laker car. All of the Lakers signed their names on the hood.
Wow.
They've since rebuilt that car since we did the film. It's a beautiful car. I've ridden in it. Slice would come pick me up in these cars. One day, the first time that we went to WORDZ together, he picked me up in Snoop's Cadillac. Now, this car is really, this is really great. So I'm sitting there with my cameras, had chinchilla fur seats, diamond-studded door panels. It said Snoop DeVille on them. But then Slice had a warehouse at the time where he worked on these cars, and there was a huge bus, an old bus like that he was working. I said, "What do you got a bus in here for?" And he goes, "Oh, Snoop wanted me to get that." I said, "To do what?" And he said, "He wants me to put really nice seats in it with built-in LCD panels on each one, and he wants me to do a wrap with Snoop's face on it, and he said he wants to pick up kids and take them to football games with it. That's what Snoop was spending all that money for." And I said, "You're kidding me." So this is a side of the guys I had no idea existed. I had no idea, because you only hear about, Snoop got thrown in jail again for having a pound of weed in his trunk. You never know. You never hear the story about, he built this really cool bus with leather seats and LCD monitors just to take kids from the hood to football games.
That's right. You don't hear that.
You never hear that. Our news media is full of crap half the time. They don't tell you the good things that are happening. So, anyway, the project
one of the things, Richard, one of the things that struck me too, Richard, is how that by circumstances you didn't really get this out to the public, but you had a process going on. But listen, as we was talking on the phone, and you was exactly right. When you look at Baltimore today and Ferguson that just occurred, and all of this other that's happening around us, this, the WORDZ Project, it's for now.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was out for a while on DVD. A company called Cinevision International had it, and they had some problems. And it kind of faltered for a while. And I never made a dime on it. And they didn't sell enough to clear expenses because they had these problems. So I managed to get the film back. And I told one of the producers I was working with at the time, I said, "Look, I'm just going to give the film away because of what's happening in our country. People need to see this and maybe remember what's really important." And that's why I decided to put it up on YouTube. And it's up. It's up on YouTube, and it's never been seen in high definition before, but you can see it in high definition on YouTube. Because at the time that we did it, when we released this in 2010, the Blu-ray was available, but it wasn't widely available yet. And remember, there was a war over whether it's going to be Blu-ray or HD DVD. Remember that?
I do. Yeah.
That's what was going on at the time. So we just did regular DVD, and that just kind of died. And then we had trouble with the churches. Well, these kids are swearing in the film. I'm going, yeah, that's kind of the way it is in the rap community. What am I supposed to do? Tell them they can't do their normal rap if they do this film? And it's like, it's like, no, I'm not going to tell them anything. I'm just thrilled that they want to be involved to do the words of Christ. I'm just thrilled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the churches copped an attitude about it. So I did. There's actually 3 versions of the film. If you are ever one that actually has the original DVD, there's a director's commentary, me, in there. There's a clean version of the film where I've taken out all the swear words, all the explicit language. And then we did another version called The Power of Words, where we had a different open and no profanity, and it got the Dove seal of approval, but it never went anywhere. Because I really didn't make this film for the church crowd. I made it for the street.
Right.
I wanted the kids who were in the rap community so they'd have something to watch. And they don't have a lot of money, so it was like it wasn't marketed to them in the way that was going to be the best effective. And so hopefully now we can get the word out that people will see it. But you were asking about The Last Poets. The Last Poets are considered the fathers of hip-hop. They started, some of the guys, Abiy O'Doon, who's like the main guy in the group, was at one time he was a Black Panther. And this was in around 1968, I guess it was. He was living in North Carolina, and he was encouraging his friends to store up as many guns as they could. And so a lot of his black friends were going out to do that. Well, some of them raided gun shops and stole a huge bunch of guns. And of course, naturally, they got thrown in jail for doing that. So Abiy O'Doon, this really, he might have looked really severe Black Panther kind of guy. It's not like that at all. He's a very gentle soul, and he felt bad that his friends, that he got him in trouble. So he had another guy who was, I hate to use terms like black and white, but it helps describe it because we're talking about North Carolina in the late 60s, and there was a lot of tension there between the white and black people there. So he knew this white guy that liked him a lot and said, I know where the KKK's main office is in town here. I think this was in Raleigh, North Carolina, if I remember right. And he said, they have a safe, and it probably has enough money in it to get you guys out of jail. I mean, this is like a movie, right? So this really happened. I'm not making this up. This is true. This is a true story. He had already been working on an album with the other guys, and it was their the Last Poets' first album, and was just about to go out into distribution from the record company, was about to release it. And so Abiy O'Doon and one other guy went in and broke into the KKK's office, got into their safe, and stole the money.
It sounds like
when that happened, everybody in town was out to get them. All of them with shotguns. And Abiy O'Doon had a gun too, but he just let it fall down his pant leg, under the ground and gave up. And I don't know what happened to the money, whether they buried it in the forest or it was something like that. So he gets thrown in jail. While he's in jail, his album becomes a hit. It's like a true Hollywood story. His album becomes a hit, and he converts to Muslimism while he's in jail. That's how the whole Muslim thing started with him. And he gave up being doing anything that was violent, and he started writing poetry. He did that in prison. Well, that was his change of heart in those days. And he's a brilliant guy, and the stuff he says is really, you've heard him in the film. After Oblivion does his thing, he's sitting by the window, and he said, this nation's been spiritually bankrupt for too long, and they're enjoying it, he said, which is an incredible statement. It's like they're getting away with not having spirituality, and they're enjoying it. They're taking advantage of the fact that everybody's given up on spiritual things. And so got Abiodun to do some reading of the WORDZ book, and this is like about Jesus Christ. This is about Yeshua, and this is a Muslim reading these words. And Abiodun called me one day, and he said, I played the tape for my mother, and she broke down in tears.
Wow.
And it was like, that just really touched me. And I said, well, the words are powerful. You don't have to preach them to anybody. If you just read them, something's going to happen.
That's a good point.
So that's where, I get tired of people pacing on a stage and yelling at the audience, because we're not the ones with the power. It's the words that have the power.
That's very good. That's you couldn't have said it any better, Richard. That's an excellent point. And I'll tell you what, I was so impressed with the WORDZ project, because, like you said, and it's interesting because you said, the target in a way was really the street. And Augusto, that isn't that the point these days at the times we're living in? There's so many now that if you're reaching anybody, it's somebody on the street, in an alley, in a corner, behind a bar. Seriously.
Yeah, they're the forgotten people.
It is. It really is. I appreciate that fact, what you just said.
Well, also, after becoming friends with Big Slice, he would tell me things that were so revealing to why life is the way it is in some of these communities, why it is with the Crips and the Bloods and all that stuff. What's the reality of all of that? Why is this happening? There's a kid in the film named Lil Drawers, and I took him out to lunch one day, and he said, remember that kid that was on the sidewalk walking while you guys were filming me? And I said, yeah. And he said, he came up to me the other day and asked how the WORDZ project was coming. Now, this is a kid in Watts, okay? And, remember in the 60s there was the Watts riots. If you remember back in your history that far, it was pretty major, it was like Ferguson or something, or Baltimore. It was really bad. Anyway, this kid told Little George, he said, I shot 3 people the other day. And Little George said, how come? He said, I just wanted to see what it was like to kill someone. And a lot of these gangs, that's kind of the initiation to do it.
That's
and
right.
The same thing happened with Big Slice. And he told me this story once where someone gave him something to drink, and he wasn't a drinker. Big Slice wasn't drinking alcohol. He wasn't used to it. And still, I don't see him really drinking anything. When we were doing the shoot, I never saw Slice drink anything. And so he got a little bit tipsy at this guy's house and wanted to prove himself, got a shotgun, was a little bit on the dizzy side after drinking this, whatever it was. Said, I'm gonna prove myself a man today. This is the thinking that goes on in Watts, okay? This is the thinking there. You have to understand that. And he gets onto this bus, the Metro, pulls out this rifle and just starts shooting. It's like, I said,
this is the atmosphere. This is the atmosphere around you, really, when you're putting all this together, isn't it? It's just all it's surrounding you.
But I never felt in danger. I felt protected. And I said, then what happened, Slice? And he goes, I ran off the bus, dove into the bushes, and he said, sat there giggling, waiting for the police to come and them to rope off the area. Because he thought he'd probably nailed somebody. I'm laughing because it's so ridiculous. It's like, this is how cheap life is, and how the gangs want to be part of something, okay? And he realized afterwards that he didn't hit anything. He didn't hurt anybody. And the bus driver closed the door and drove away, and he goes, "Oh, darn, nothing happened." And I said, "Well, see, there you go. God was protecting you because he knew that you were supposed to be doing something else with your life than sitting in a jail cell for the rest of your life." And then another time, he had a friend that just had shot someone. So he was, the guy was dead or almost dead on the ground, shot with a 9mm. Slice pulls out his 9mm, pulls the trigger, and the gun jammed. Nothing happened. I said, there again, when you were being really stupid, God protected you.
That's a good point.
And Slice, out of all of the guys in the film, is probably what I would consider to be the heavyweight Christian of all of them. So
what you're saying, Richard, is for a lot of people that live their normal lives just around town, so to speak, it's difficult for them to wrap their mind around everyday life at another location that's totally different. Matter of fact, actually diametrically opposed to how they live every day. It really is.
Well, yeah. Another time he said he went to Watts, and these kids come out to see him because Slice is kind of a celebrity and a very loving, gentle soul. All these kids come out because it's this kid's birthday. He just turned 14. And he comes up to Big Slice and goes, "Hey, can you teach me how to ride a bike?" And Slice goes, "What do you mean you don't know how to ride a bike and you're like 14? He goes, "Yeah." And so Slice goes, "Does anybody here have a bike?" He goes, "Yeah." And they all bring him out. One's like the chain's busted. Another one's got a flat tire. And Slice was going, when I was a kid, if my bike was broken for more than 10 hours, there was something really wrong. Because that's how you got around and how you did stuff and had fun.
That's right.
And he asked him, he said, "How come you guys don't fix your bicycles?" And he said, "Well, we're inside playing video games." He said, "Well, why are you doing that?" He said, "Because we don't want to get shot." Isn't that revealing?
It is. It is.
Because we don't want to get shot.
And that's everyday life for some people.
They can't have a normal life. So a lot of the kids in Watts want to be rap stars. So when I would come in with my film camera and Big Slice would be there, and we're rolling in Snoop's car, we were treated like celebrities, like I was treated like a celebrity. It's like, well, he's in Snoop's car. So everybody was giving me like their their CDs or their music and performing through the window as we're driving by and everything else. And they, tossing CDs into the car. I mean, if you look closely, the shot where we're in Hollywood and Snoop and Big Slice are in the car and they're driving down in front of when Jerry Buss is getting a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame and the guys are driving away. Just one of the bystanders is throwing a CD of his music into the back seat as they go by. That's the life here.
Yeah.
But the kids in Watts that are doing that are doing it because they want to get discovered and get enough money to get out of there. That's why they're doing their music. It's an escape from that kind of life. They want to live like a normal person, and they don't know how. They don't have the opportunity. I've always wanted to say that and haven't been able to, but thanks for giving me the platform on your show, Larry, to be able to talk about it.
Well, you have now, and I think there's aspects of what you're talking about today that most people don't think about. Matter of fact, probably have great difficulty imagining what you're saying in their minds. I mean, you're telling a truth about a situation in America that began, like you said, some of them in the 50s, and of course I was born before that, but not a lot. But a lot of people, we can't really understand where they're coming from, and that's why a lot of times, it reminds me so much, Richard and Augusto, it reminds me so much of David Wilkerson going in and talking to a Nicky Cruz, a guy that would kill you, but you know,
right.
then we know the result.
So it's just like that. I mean, it was just like that. I thought about this is kind of a modern day cross in the Switchblade, but except like we're riding on their bus. I mean, we're really entrenched with it, and a lot of studios wouldn't accept rap artists anymore because the gangster rap thing just you kind of see it in Mr. Mix's eyes. Mr. Mix was one of the main guys in the group Two Live Crew, and Two Live Crew was the rap group whose lyrics were so explicit that the parents got up in arms, and that's why we have an explicit lyrics badge on certain albums, is because of Mr. Mix. And Mr. Mix wanted to make amends for that and showed up to read the words of Jesus on the film, which is really cool. And he explains how that happened. And he said, well, we were just rapping what we heard Red Fox and some other guys do in their comedy routines. Eddie Murphy, Red Fox. So if you listen to those things, the stuff the Two Live Crew was rapping about was stuff they just heard.
Uh-huh.
And that's what the studios wanted.
Richard, you gave it a real twist, though, when they began to rap about the red words of Jesus Christ, or as Lee Candleton said, Jesus of Nazareth, the red words.
Right. Yeah. So Larry, you know that I did that, and then I worked on the Torah codes, and so I've told people it doesn't make much sense unless you hear the whole story, but my life has been involved with rabbis and rappers for the past 7 or 8 years, which is a very strange combination.
You got that right. You know, Richard, a lot of people, when I mention Torah codes, especially on some of the radio shows, and I know Augusto's seen this too, and we're going to come back in a few minutes. We got about 3 more minutes, Richard, in this hour. But it's so interesting when you mention Torah codes, it's like people's eyes glaze over. It's like you've lost everybody almost sometimes.
I know it's not for everybody. I think it's an end times phenomena. It's what I just personally think.
Well, I think you're right.
Well, like these gangs and these people that are in that environment, they are not going to listen to normal preachers, and they are not going to go to normal churches. I have a friend of mine, and I know we only have a couple of minutes, but I just want to put in this real quick. I have a friend of mine down in Miami, Florida, and he used to pastor a church. I think he's pastoring again, but his ministry is basically ministering to gangs and gangs members. And, he has to dress with, like them. He has to put an earring on his ear, on his nose. He has to put the chain on. Or he will not be accepted into their groups. But he goes in there and he wins them to the Lord. And his church was basically made up of ex-gang members. And instead of,
cool.
Instead of sitting in the church, he would have them go out there and do work. Like they would go and help the older people. They would go and paint over the graffiti, in the city, and the gangs and the gang, all these people had written on the walls. So they would go and erase that and clean up and and paint and witness to other gang members. And so this type of ministry, again, is not for everybody, like you're saying. And so the body of Christ needs to be more mature and open to these things. God will use methods and people that are different, that are going to do different things, that are going to reach elements that will never be reached by any other mean. And so this is the wisdom of the ministering the gospel. Jesus said that this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the earth before he comes. And so who is going to reach some of these people groups? See, So this is one of the things that people need to be open, need to be prayerful, and not be quick to criticize, but be kind of patient. Be more patient, be more tolerant, because the Lord is using many of these methods and many of these people to reach many lost people out there. I personally met a lot of them, ex-gang members, ex-gangsters, and they're now the most beautiful Christians, and they have the most humble character and the most humble attitude that I have ever seen. So yeah, I agree. I see what what you're saying and what you're doing, and so the people need to be more understanding of that.
Well, I agree.
Guys,
I think.
Yeah,
are we at the end of the hour here?
We're right at it. Did you want to finish something, and then we'll take a break and come back for the next hour on Torah codes?
Yeah, just to cap that off, I'd like to say that I think a lot of times churches and the people in it consider themselves above everybody else, and we're not supposed to be like that.
That's right.
And when you associate with guys like this, I was like, the amount of talent these guys have dwarfed anything I was doing. These guys were giants in the work that they were doing, and the fact that they were doing it, I felt really blessed that they were able to do that for us, and that they also became blessed themselves by participating. So I think if you go in with an attitude where you're not saying that you got all the answers, or that you're going in there to preach to people right off the bat, I think you get a lot more accomplished sometimes.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Well, everyone, we're going to take a top of the hour break. Dorothy will put a little music on here, and then when we come back, we're going to corner Richard and talk about the Torah Code. Well, folks, we're back for the second hour, and that was, Richard, that was the most fascinating first hour of, that's a perspective. The WORDZ Project really is perspective in life that a lot of us really don't associate with sometimes that much, but it's there. It's really there. It's reality, and I think that that's really a special work that you did. And now we're going to make a right turn and go into the Torah codes. And Richard, by the way, if you want to, always wanted to say something about the Torah codes and never got the opportunity, I'm giving it to you now. And Augusto, if you've got some questions, Augusto, feel free to come in there. But Richard, I did send the latest matrix or the latest Torah code copy that you sent me to Augusto. So he's aware of that, so he may have a question on that. But Richard, tell us tell us about the Torah codes.
Well, I did some before on the last show with you, so I can either go back and do like a little wrap-up of that and then give you some updates or whatever you'd like to do, but basically about the same time that I was working on WORDZ, or slightly, actually it was around the same year, around 2009, I was trying to do a promo to help raise some money to be able to do the Torah Code film. Now, this was at the same time I'm finishing the editing on WORDZ Project. And I had met the various professors and rabbis and felt that we had a good relationship and some trust had been built up. And these men don't give their trust easily. It takes a while because they had been burned by the news media and also by Christian ministries, as a matter of fact. Boy, that's not anything new.
No.
But,
no. And at the same time, Richard, at the same time, what you're saying is exactly right, because during the time frame that you're beginning to look at to do some Torah Code work, and I was following a little of your work, you'd already announced it was, at one point you had a Code 2012, I think, and we're moving toward 2012, and I, during this time, had been emailing and chatting back and forth a little bit with Eliyahu Rips, in Israel, and I didn't know Glazrson as well, and Herlick as well, but I had read some of their books. So you're exactly right. The media hit them pretty hard at times.
Well, I mean, they had been involved in several documentary projects. One that the BBC Horizon did, one that was done by Jerry Rose's company up in Chicago, and then there were 2 Bible Code films that were done by the History Channel. And pretty much all of these films were done using the tables from Michael Drosnin's book, The Bible Codes.
Mm-hmm.
And I just couldn't understand that. I mean, I have nothing against Michael Drosnin's book. I think that it awakened people to the reality that these codes are real, that they're just not, we're not making this stuff up. You can get out your computer and put the words in, and this is what comes out, and it's repeatable. It's not just happened once, it's in there. So what I gradually learned after hanging out with my various new rabbi and professor friends is that the Hebrew itself, the Hebrew language, is complicated, and that oftentimes people aren't really correctly interpreting these words, or they're using the wrong form of the words, or, I mean, it's just, there's a lot of ways to screw up how you're doing searches, which is why I refuse to do them myself. I won't do it, because then I fall into the same trap. I mean, I would basically say that Michael Drosnin has a lot more experience than I do as a writer for big firms. I mean, he worked for I think he was a reporter for the Washington Post for a long time. He's written several books. He wrote the basis, from what I understand, that they used to make the movie The Aviator about Howard Hughes. So he's done some really good stuff, and his work is really fascinating to read, and I always enjoy reading a book that he's done. The problem with it is that Michael Drosnin, right off the bat, is honest and says he doesn't believe in God, and just is looking at this expression from the Bible as being a phenomenon that really intrigues him, and thinks that aliens did it. He says in his first book.
Yeah.
He thinks that's how it happened, because no human could possibly have done this. It's way too complicated. Well, how crazy that sounds, but the weird thing is, the more you study other ancient texts, and a lot of Christians don't believe this, but the Book of Enoch, to me, I think there's a lot of information in there that people need to study.
Sure.
And there's other things in a lot of stuff in Genesis that seems to make us, I mean, there's stuff going on here that with angels and with supernatural beings throughout the Torah being the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. People will ask me about a verse like I was asked the other day. I was on Fade to Black with Jimmy Church.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, what's the first verse of the Bible? I said, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. And he said, that's in the book of Genesis, though. And I said, yeah, that's the first book of the Torah. And people don't realize that the Torah is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. That's kind of the way it is. The Jews call the Old Testament the Tanakh. The Tanakh is like everything between Genesis through Malachi, the prophet, the minor prophets at the end, but the first 5 books are, if anything, if you're verging into an area that today, in today's vernacular, you would call the paranormal, well, the Torah is really there. It fits into that whole paranormal thing. In fact, this coming weekend, I'm on a paranormal television show in Fresno just to talk about the Torah codes. Now, that may sound weird to you, but I was telling my friend L.A. Marzulli the other day, I said, and also my co-producer, Terry Tilton, who's been just incredibly, invaluably helpful with this project and incredibly patient in getting paid for doing anything. I said the paranormal crowd has almost become the new church. They get it. They realize this stuff is real and that we're not making it up and that this stuff is happening. And paranormal activity can mean a bunch of things. It can mean UFOs. It could be the Torah codes. It could be demonic activity, shadow people. I mean, it goes into things that people just derive. You know, you can see their eyebrows raise. Oh, I'm going to turn this off. This is getting too weird for me. But
that's true.
When you read in the Torah, Moses throws his stick down on the ground. It turns into a snake. Oh yeah, it happens every day now, right? Or two guys appear to rescue Lot and his family, and all these people are ready to attack him and rape his daughter and everything else, and they do something, hit him with a burst of light energy, and it blinds them all. Now it's like, oh yeah, it happens every day too. And that's, so we read this stuff in the scriptures, Jacob's ladder, Joseph reading the Pharaoh's dreams and knowing what they were about and interpreting them about the coming famine and lack of rain and drought and all of those things. All this stuff is in the Torah. Meanwhile, in the midst of all of these stories meticulously written that people have read for thousands of years now, Torah is 3,327 years old this year. But in the midst of all of that are codes. It's encoded. And you go, oh, come on, give me a friggin' break. I don't believe it. Well, it's true. If you start on the first letter Tet in the book of Genesis and you skip every 50 letters, it spells the word Torah. You go, well, that's right. It is the Torah, so maybe they encoded that word in the book of Genesis. Big deal. Well, let's try it in the book of Exodus. You go to the first letter Tet, and you skip every 50 letters, and it says Torah in the book of Exodus. In the book of Leviticus, if you skip every 8 letters, it spells out the word Hashem. Now, that's the Jewish name for the God of no name. God didn't have a name in those days. This was before that they called him Jehovah or I am or anything like that. It was like the unknown, the God of no name, Hashem.
That's right.
And then in the book of Numbers, it spells Torah every 50 letters again, but backwards. And then in the book of Deuteronomy, it spells Torah again. This is counting with your finger. You can do this. You don't need no computer. You just count with your fingers. So the book reads Torah, Torah, God, mirror image Torah, mirror image Torah. It's like, are you telling me that just happened by chance?
Wow.
When you know that stuff, it's like, okay, this is frigging intentional. It's in there to say, here's a big clue. I'm dangling it here. If you just use your finger without having a computer and just count, these words are there. What you going to do about it? Now, what happens is, when I started hanging out with these men who are way more brilliant than me, I mean, at the level that Bone Thugs and Harmony are better rappers than I would ever be, the professors and rabbis that are doing the Torah code work are better mathematicians and scientists than I could ever be too. So why all these people are hanging out with me, I don't know, but I feel very fortunate to know the rappers and to know the rabbis. I don't know why they're working with me. But I see what they're doing, and I value it. And I'm thinking, these are the world experts. They are the ones who started this phenomena, and they're going to see it through. But what I'm very careful now is Glazrson and I communicate more than any of the other ones because Glazrson is obsessed with Torah codes. Mm-hmm. And I don't say that in a bad way. He's doing them every day, 2 or 3 new tables a day. Anything that interests him, he's looking it up to see if it's there. So I send him ideas for stuff, and he looks it up. He looks up stuff I don't ask him to look up, of course. I mean, the other day, he's flying to Los Angeles. I said, Richard, I found this is a divine gift from God. I said, what did you find? He said, I found it on the plane, and it said, Torah codes will be distributed in 5775, that's year, and it had my name next to it.
Wow, that's interesting.
Richard
Wow.
Shaw. Now, I've never seen a table quite like that before. We found them at, say, Pinlight and stuff like that. And I didn't ask him to look my name up because I know it's a lot of work to do that. He did that on his own. And then he realized that if he put his name in, it ended up next to mine, just a little space to the right, and another whole cluster of words. So it's like he said, this is a divine gift from God. It's like it shows that this is going to be done this year. I said, well, we need to sell a lot more than we're currently selling to make it a success, but I'm glad when people buy them, you know?
Wow.
But he told me, he said, in Israel, no one has Blu-ray players. And I said, well, it's different here in America. I said, if you go to Best Buy or, you know, anything like that, and you want to buy a DVD, almost everything on the shelf is Blu-ray, and you can hardly find a standard def DVD anymore. And Blu-ray players here in the States are like $59 now. You can get a Sony Blu-ray player for $59, and it looks just fine. But in Israel, they're not used to spending an introductory price of under $25 for a dual disc pack, you know, with a regular DVD and a Blu-ray disc in it. And we're charging $23.95 for the Torah Code 2-disc set, which is pretty cheap compared to what the studios charge. But he said in Israel they're used to spending 60 shekels on a disc. I said, well, how much is that? And he goes, about $15. I said, okay. So what you're asking me to do then is make a standard def DVD and sell it for $15. He said, that would be great. And I said, well, let me check into it. Well, we don't have a lot of money right now because we haven't sold enough discs to barely even pay off the production yet. Because, you know, it takes a long time to ramp these things up. So I checked with Advanced Digital Systems in Hollywood that we use to do all of our pressing and printing and all that stuff, and they gave me a price, and weirdly, I got a notice from Amazon that our sales were up, and just after we decided to do that, to go ahead and do it for Israel, Amazon, the profits from Amazon was enough to pay for it.
Wow, now that's interesting, you know?
So it's in production right now. We're hoping to get those in about, a week and a half, maybe, before the end of the month. And we'll have the Torah Code in standard def DVD available for $14.95.
Man, that's a good price.
Yeah, and I don't mean to sound, silly here. I'm just saying it was kind of like a miraculous thing. All of a sudden the money just appeared and we produced the DVDs and they're in production right now. It's really
amazing.
Weird. Yeah. So,
let me ask
people
you,
will
let
get
me
it
ask
that
you
couldn't,
something real quick.
Get the other version.
It's a question.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a question that came to mind, and I want to ask you this and explain it any way you feel like you want to. When like we'll just use for example Glazrson, most recently, found your name and some other things, some other wording, and
right.
called you and told you about that. Now let me ask you this, because I know it's important how the interpretation of the words come out to what the meaning really is. Do you guys, because I know you may not have all the words of the puzzle, so to speak, but do you guys work together to try to interpret what the meaning is of what the words are forming and putting together, or does Glazrson do that, or what is the, okay, I found these words, but do you get into the point where, well, what does that mean?
Oh, sure. I mean, Glazrson is usually bouncing off the walls with excitement to show me something, and I can't wait to see his stuff. It's always interesting. But I think that what he's been finding recently is just so incredible. I don't know if you saw. I think you saw the Gematria piece, Larry, that I did with Glazrson, where he was using basically it's numerology. It's like looking at the Hebrew characters, and each character is assigned a number that they've always been assigned, and they are all adding up to the number 776, which refers to 5776 next year.
I saw that.
I have no explanation for why that's happening. I just thought it was interesting. Now, and I'm not predicting the Messiah is coming next year, but the gematria is connected with the return of the Messiah in 2016. Now, that could mean a lot of things. It could mean, well, maybe the Messiah will return sometime next year. Maybe that will happen. Or maybe people will be talking about the Messiah coming so much that it ended up in the Torah codes or ended up in gematria. That, it was just like it had to burst out of the scriptures because so many people are talking about it. I know that all over the world, I've never seen a time where people are praying for their Messiah to come back. I mean, Iran, the murderous things that they're doing is to bring their Mahdi back to appear, their 12th Imam. The Christians want Jesus to appear. The Jews want whoever their Messiah is, Elijah or Moses or whatever, and they, according to ancient Jewish mystical texts, it's Elijah comes back to announce the Messiah. Isn't that interesting? And so the Christians talk about the two witnesses in the book of Revelation, that there's going to be two witnesses show up that'll be murdered, and then their bodies will lay in the streets, and then they come back to life and disappear. I mean, there's going to be some really strange things going on. I think the things that we're about to see are going to be so weird that people are going to be taken aback by that.
Yeah, I agree.
But some of the codes, I mean, I may have talked about this last time, but I don't know if I had this table. Did I talk about the Netanyahu table? I still find that really amazing.
No, I think we found that out just before the election, and we haven't had an interview since then. But that one is incredible if you want to share it. And Augusto, hop in there anytime you want to talk to Richard about something.
Yeah, well, Augusto, do you have your laptop on or your computer on right now that I could?
Yes. I have a question on. I saw that video with Rabbi Glazrson and that you did, which it was real good. And when I saw that, the two dates that he mentioned, which is 5776 and 5775. 75 being 2015, and 76 being 576 being 5776 being next year, 2016. Of course, this ties in with all the other things that are already happening with the blood moons, the Shemitah year, which is we are in a sabbatical right now, and
that's right.
And then next year, at around the fall, the Day of Atonement, we will be entering the Jubilee year. So all of these things play into this end time event. It's just so many things just coming together. It's incredible. So when I saw that, I was very, very interested in it, and there are many prophecies regarding the coming of Messiah. Also, and Larry and I have talked about it. There is many archaeological finds that have. I think one of them was in Ecuador, wasn't it, Larry? The one that they found in Ecuador, where it says on the bottom of the pyramid,
yes,
the son of the Creator cometh.
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
so all these things.
There was also this is diverts a little bit, but a guy named Klaus Donna.
Yeah, Klaus Donna.
He found a femur bone of a 25-foot individual in Ecuador. And I knew he was going to be on Jimmy Church's show the other day. Now, we're talking back, again, in the Torah, in the 6th chapter of the book of Genesis. It talks about giants will be on the earth, and were on the earth in those days and afterwards, it says. Well,
yep.
how do we prove that unless we have some kind of proof? Well, Klaus Donna says he's found this enormous bone in Ecuador, and he sent a piece of it off for DNA to Japan to have it tested. But he said they're asking for a mastodon bone to compare it to. Come to find out, I'm listening to this, and I had just talked with Joe Taylor. I remember, you guys, Joe is like this world-class casting expert that can take bones and cast them and make a replica of it that looks identical to the original bone. And Joe and I were talking in Lubbock, Texas, because I was speaking there at a church last month, and Dan Cressman's church. And he told me that they had found mastodon bones when they were building this building, and I didn't know where he had found it. I guess it was in South America somewhere, and might have access to mastodon bones. So, I mean, I'm hearing Klaus Donna said he needs mastodon bones, and 2 weeks earlier, Joe Taylor's telling me he knows where mastodon bones are. I mean, that's weird. That's a weird synchronous thing. Those kind of things happen to me all the time. I don't ask for them to happen, but they do. So, you know, if Klaus wants to, we'll do an expedition down there and try to get some mastodon bones and send them off to Japan so they can make their comparison. I mean, some of these things seem to be happening on their own. You know, it's really kind of bizarre. But the reason I was asking you guys if you had your computers open, because I wanted to show you a new table that's up on the Pinlight site. If you go to pinlight.com, it will automatically jump to the About page. And if you scroll down, you'll see the Netanyahu table that we talked about. And this one basically says Netanyahu will be elected in 5775 on March 17th. And Glazrson found that table on February 9th, over a month before the election occurred. So when the news media was telling us that, well, it looks like it's going to be a tight race and Netanyahu doesn't really have much of a chance to win, I knew that Glazrson had found this table long before then. So that, well, we'll see if the Torah codes are actually predicting this. And sure enough, they were. So then
now,
I got this table from him.
Mm-hmm. I have a question, Richard, that I didn't quite finish to ask you about that other table that you sent. Now, Larry sent me a copy of the 2016 Messiah.
Yes.
One question I had, and maybe you can ask, you know, or some other sources, but one of the questions I have is that Messiah, would that Messiah be our Messiah, or would that be the Jewish Messiah, which of course would turn out to be the other Messiah? So that is the one question I had when I saw that, and I am praying that it is our Messiah and not the other Messiah, because the Lord Jesus Christ did say, I come in my own name, and you received me not, but another will come in his own name. Him you will receive. So we know that there is going to be an event that is going to usher in maybe the Mahdi. It could be Maitreya, it could be someone else that will come as the Messiah, and will be received by many, by the Jews, not only the Jews, but it will be received by many religions, the Buddhists, the Hindus, and even many Christians. He will claim to be all of those things. So could this be this individual that will make an appearance in 2016? I know that Tom Horn and others have written about that. And, he has to appear. This individual has to make an appearance first before the Messiah comes. So that is one question I had about that, whether that Messiah would be our Messiah or the Jewish Messiah. Of course, after they are basically deceived by this other individual, then the Lord himself, the real Messiah, will reveal himself to them. and he will show them his scars, like it says in the book of Zechariah, and they will see whom they have pierced. And they will ask him, what are those marks? And he says, the wounds with which I was wounded in the house of my friends. So, that's one question I had, but just the fact that came out in the Torah Code is astonishing by itself. And the other thing I was going to say to you also, Richard, was that the following year, I'm interested in knowing what he would find, Rabbi Glazrson would find in the Torah Code for the next year, which would be 5777, 3 sevens.
Well, he mentioned that in that thing. He said that, what's interesting about 776 is that it comes before 777, and he said 777 is the number of completion, basically kingdom number. So the answer to those questions is we don't know. It would be crazy to say that we know exactly what it's talking about one way or the other. But it very well could be. All I do, I have to take to me, the best blow-by-blow analysis of what's supposed to happen in the end times would probably not agree with some of what the rabbis and professors believe is going to happen. But for me, the book of Matthew, chapter 24, is what I use as kind of my guidebook for what's supposed to happen. Because so far, it seems to me that the outline that Yeshua gives in that particular chapter is basically telling us what's happening now. There'll be wars and rumors of wars. There's earthquakes in diverse places. And my friend L.A. Marzulli has often said, and he pointed out that, how would Jesus know 2,000 years ago about earthquakes appearing all over the world? But now we've got seismic monitoring connected up to computer networks anywhere. You can tell if there's an earthquake in Nepal like seconds after it happened. Mm-hmm. And this is the first time in human history that's been possible. Before, you'd have to, get on a boat, and if you're going to a place and you find it's destroyed, when you get there, you go, oh, they had an earthquake 2 years ago. Oh, and by the time you get home to talk about it, it's been, 2 or 3 years have passed. But now it's like instantaneous information, and it seems like Jesus knew that was going to be the way it was. But then, like you're saying, there's going to be this guy who comes and basically acts like he's the Messiah, and he's going to stop the sacrifices in the holy place. Now, in Matthew 24, it basically reads, it says, let the reader understand, because essentially Yeshua was quoting a passage in the book of Daniel that talks about this event where this guy stops things from happening, and then you're supposed to, head out of the house and don't even stop to get your jacket, because all hell's going to break loose, essentially, when that happens. So what he says after that is it might be in Luke 21, where he says to go to the mountains. Now, I've always wondered what that was all about. Why would you go to the mountains? And I've been into Jerusalem, and I've been to those mountains, and it's like, well, okay, what would I be doing here if there was some kind of an attack or something? Why would I want to come here? And then I found out from a guy that Terry knows named Joel, who had been to Israel just before we left, and he came back and said, I've learned that they're in process of making kind of last-ditch effort enormous bomb shelters in the mountains surrounding Jerusalem.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I said, well, and Joel's Jewish, and I said, well, Yeshua tells everybody to head for the mountains when this happens. And I never understood that. So he knew 2,000 years ago there was going to be these places that you could go to be safe. Isn't that incredible?
Wow.
And they're only building them now. So, I don't know. I just think that's really just fascinating. But to me, there's like all these things that happen. People start disappearing. And right after that, something appears in the heavens. Something big and nasty. And people, the whole earth mourns because they know that they're about to be hit with something. We don't know if it's Planet X or if it's an asteroid or both. We don't know what it is. But something comes and creates enormous devastation. And after all that passes, then we've got like a new heaven and new earth kind of situation for about 1,000 years. But the reason why I want you guys to go to the website is that I have a new table there, right under the Netanyahu one, that I wanted you to see. And it says asteroid.
Uh-huh.
In 5776, in Tishri, which is the month of September, it says, in the land, from our God, and then it says the warning.
Huh.
Now
I saw that.
I don't know what that means. Because there's been other Torah code tables about asteroids, and there's the real famous one that Michael Drosnin found. Did I mention that on the last show? I can't remember, Larry. I've been on so many radio programs lately.
No, I don't. Michael Drosnin got off into some really strange stuff, and he wrote three books on that. And
yeah, I've got all his books. I've read them all.
Yeah, I have too.
But remember, I always tell this. I'll tell this briefly because I know we don't have much time. But remember, in 2012, guys, there was this comet called Elenin.
Uh-huh.
One day I was, the people were saying, well, it's going to intersect Earth's path and it's got an ejecta the size of the planet Jupiter, and it's going to black out the sun for 3 days, and on and on. We kept hearing about Elenin. And I'm driving home in my car and listening to the news, and they said, Comet Elenin has flown too close to the sun and is breaking up. And I'm thinking, I've heard about that somewhere, and I ran home and I looked in the Drosnin's book, which everybody should have a copy of Michael Drosnin's first book, at least that one, The Bible Code, it's called.
It is good.
I mean, that's just, it's a good book, and while some of it, the stuff in there is a bit questionable, I think for the most part, I think the book is really interesting. It got me started down this path. I have to give it credit for that. But I think it's page 134 or something in near that area, there's a table. There's two tables with a comet, and it says, in 2012, Earth annihilated. And then right below that, it says, in 2012, comet. Then it says, I will break it in pieces. So we had like two different scenarios with a comet. Now you have to understand, that book was published, in something like 97 or 98. Something like that.
Yeah.
No one knew about a comet. There would be no way you could predict a comet that far into the future. It's impossible. And yet, he has the table. So I scanned that page. I sent it to Rabbi Glazrson. I said, what do you think of this? He immediately got to work on it with Dr. Alexander Rotenberg. They did a new table that said comet, and it said the star Nibiru, and it said the end of Elenin, and then in the lower left-hand corner, with hardly any spaces between the text, in fact, it might have actually been the plain text, I'm not sure, but it said, in the end of days.
Well,
So,
if you remember, back
amazing.
in that time when Elenin was coming in, now a lot of people mocked it. They didn't believe it. They thought it was conspiracy, another one of those false alarms. But I always say, don't watch what the elites, or don't listen to what the elites say. Watch what they do. And if people watched what they did back then, they were running for cover, and they were going into their Denver, Colorado bunkers. People, even the Queen of England disappeared. No one knows where she went. Executives were taking long vacations, and members of Congress.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got all that documented. So they expected something to happen, but like you said, and the Lord intervened, and it showed in the Torah Code. He intervened, and he just destroyed it. And I was just amazed at how that happened. But Larry and I talked about it many times. Richard, the power of intercessory prayer is able to achieve things that nothing else can, and I am a firm believer in that, and I truly believe that this other one that is coming, and I believe it could be also this thing could be real in 2016. Another asteroid. There is one coming in 3 days that is going to come so close to Earth. I've got that posted on our website. And they're saying this is going to be the asteroid that is going to come the closest of that size, the closest ever, is going to give us a shave. So these things are coming very close to Earth. So it wouldn't surprise me if one of them makes it through. But I am still praying. We can pray. Everyone can pray, and prayer is very powerful. And if the Lord did it once, he can do this again. He can shatter any of these asteroids like nothing.
Well, sure. And yet when we read the book of Revelation, we know that that at least 2 of them are destined to hit the planet. That's part of the end time scenario. So, it's like that if we live or we die, we're with the Lord. It doesn't really matter. I would rather not get fried by a meteor, but if it's that big, you wouldn't know what hit you. It would happen so fast. And people are so worried about dying because they have no faith. They've been raised that, this life is all that there is, and you go into a black hole afterwards, and that's it. And that's not it at all. This is just like one aspect of living. And being ready for the next life is what is the most important thing we can do.
Right. I agree. Absolutely. That is the most important thing right now for anyone that is listening is to be ready spiritually. All the other preparations are fine, but spiritually, are you ready if it was your time to go today? That is the key question, to accept Jesus Christ, Yeshua, as your only Lord and Savior.
And, a lot of people, I always love this one passage of Scripture in Matthew where Yeshua says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name and drive out demons, perform many miracles? And then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. So a lot of people who've been following certain people that they thought were good or giving them good information, what's really interesting here is that it's the one who does the will of the Father, what Jesus says. And constantly he's saying the Father, the Father, the Father, the Father. I think that's interesting. The disciples asked Jesus how to pray. It's our Father who art in heaven. It's always the Father.
Right.
So he's never usurping that authority, which is cool.
No, he actually did nothing that was not the Father's will.
That's right.
He said it. I do nothing. I only do that which I see my Father do, and say the things that I see my Father say. And and this is why he had such a success rate in healings and miracles, because he only did what he saw the Father do. Many times, one of the things and one of the questions that people ask me is, Should I go preach the gospel to this one? Should I go witness to that one? And I always tell him, I said, let the Lord lead you. Because if you do not allow the Lord to lead you, you will be spinning your wheels, doing things that he never asked you to do, and then you get hurt, and then things happen or don't happen, and then you blame yourself, blame God, and he never asked you to do that. You know, I had an experience some time ago, Richard and Larry, where I was still in Miami, and I was preaching the gospel. I was pastoring the church, and I was in my quiet time with the Lord, ministering to him, praying, and I heard his voice, and it really shocked me because I was not expecting to hear this. And this is what he asked me. He said, "Why are you doing what I didn't ask you to do?" And I said, at first I thought it was the devil. I said, "I rebuke you, Satan, get out of here." I mean, what are you talking about? I said, I am doing what I'm supposed to do. I am preaching the gospel. I'm pastoring this church. But no, it was the Lord. He said it again. Why are you doing what I didn't ask you to do? And so eventually I got it. I got it. I said, Lord, I mean, you don't want me. You really don't want me doing this here at this time, do you? And you know, this is what led eventually to my departure from pastoring the church. And you know, he visited me after that and gave me clear direction on what to do. He didn't want me there. He didn't want me pastoring that church anymore. But you know, this is what it takes to ask the Lord, the Father, what is it that you want, Lord? Am I doing what you want me to do? And am I where you want me to be? See,
well, I think that's
very,
true,
very important.
Because this is a very unusual time that we're living in. I mean, now you can do more on the internet than you could pastoring a church in some cases. You're reaching more people, and I think too, like, some people are tired of being preached at. They want to just know what's going on, and I think we have a responsibility to explain these things to people, not in a preachy sort of way, but like, well, you know, can we look at the Bible just once without it being tied to religion? Can we just say, okay, what does it say? What happened? Mm-hmm. Why were these guys writing about such strange stuff? You know, why were they talking about wheels in the sky on fire? Or what about this stairway that went up into heaven that Jacob saw? You know, and what is all that stuff? Mm-hmm. That's the part that's the most interesting. And now we've got to have some answers to those things. Otherwise, it's just a fairy tale. It's just like, this is why people don't go to church. It's like, well, this is just baloney. And no one's really going into it. Now we're seeing, and Larry sends me these incredible pictures all the time, UFOs all over the world. I mean, it's like there's sightings of things that we can't explain, that our news media covers worse than poorly. If anything, they ridicule it. At a certain point, though, people are starting to catch on that we're not making this stuff up. It's really happening. And we're living in very unique times, very incredible, interesting, almost like science fiction is like going on right in front of our eyes if we take the time long enough to just see it and be open to what's happening.
I believe, Richard, that the Lord has his pieces where he needs them. You mentioned in the first hour, you know, that you didn't know why the Lord was allowing you to be with, you know, like the rappers and those kinds of people and the rabbis. Well, that is what you were created for.
Sure.
That's what the Lord put you here for. And you're doing something that I am not doing. I probably wouldn't do it. Although you know, the Lord had to hit me over the head. I did produce some rap music, like prophetic rap, back in the year 2000, and that's another story. But he has a sense of humor. Sometimes he just throws you into areas that you just don't expect. But I believe with all of my heart that you're performing a function that is ordained of the Lord, that is for this time. And Larry is doing his part that the Lord has him doing, and I am doing my part. And each person, each one of his children is performing.
Everyone has a role.
A role. There you go. This brother in Miami I mentioned, the same.
You guys know who George Norrie is. Does the show Coast to Coast AM. I was on his show a couple months ago, and we were talking about the Torah codes, and people were calling in with questions, and a lady called in and said, because we found George's name in the Torah codes in rather a dramatic sense, and that's all up on the Pinlight site if you want to see George's tables. But he goes, why do you think my name's in there? And this woman called up and said, I think it's because God ordained you to do what you're doing. And I told him after she got off the line, I said, I would tend to agree with this woman, George, because right now, Coast to Coast AM has become like the paranormal church. I said it's where people are able to discuss very strange things that they can't talk to their pastors about, and that the people in their churches, diss them if they talk about it and think they're weird or they're demonic or it's like something. And it's like, no, these are experiences that real people are having, and they don't know where to go to discuss it, which is tremendously sad. Because the Bible is full of this kind of information, and now so that it's happening to people, we think they're weird and won't talk to them. It's really incredible to me. I just can't believe it, but that's true. I guess throughout human history it's been like that.
Yeah. It's going to get weird.
I hate to... I want to go ahead and give you time, though, guys, to... if you would, Augusto, and we're running out of time, and my apologies to the people I said to send in questions, because it seemed like the flow of the show went another direction, and I didn't get to that, and we ran out of time, and I'm going to have to do another show with Richard, but we've only got a couple of minutes. Richard, if you would, give out how people can make contact with you or what they should look for, or your website, and so we can go there.
Oh, sure, and thank you very much, Larry, for having me on again. It's always a joy to be on your program and just to talk with you again. Anybody can see anything they want about the Torah codes at pinlight.com is my website, pinlight.com, and the official Torah Code website, because the film is called Torah Codes End to Darkness, so go to endtodarkness.com, like the end of something, T-O, darkness.com. And that way you can see the trailer to the film, you can order the film if you want to, and you can see also the Gematria piece that talks about the Messiah.
Oh, thank you, Richard. And Augusto, I appreciate so much you being a part of this. Will you give out your website and any information right now, how people can reach your ministry or your work?
Yes, it's theappearance.com, just like that. www.theappearance, theappearance.com, and you just go there. We have a lot of material there. You can download it, read it, and you can be placed on a mailing list as well if you so want.
Well, thank you, Augusto, and Richard. This has been, here again, we just ran out of time. We got 4 seconds, and I want to thank you so much for coming on, and I really do feel that this has been an important program. We'll see where all this goes, but I'm glad you got to reveal the information that you wanted to get out, and we're going to do this again, Richard, and let you tell some other things you've been wanting to say for a long time. And good luck on your next Watchers, because I know that's coming up.
Oh, thanks so much. Well, we were talking
you,
here.
Richard.
I got 2 emails from Rabbi Glazrson, so I want to read those as soon as we go off the air.
Thank you, Larry.
Thanks, guys. It's a pleasure
Augusto,
with both of you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Dorothy, for standing in for us. And let your people know that I apologize. We ran completely out of time, and we'll do this again. Thank you. Shalom, my friends.